Hi, I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
And you're listening to the ITPro podcast, here to brighten up your quarantine with all the latest IT news and insights. Yes, that's right, we are still under lockdown, as is most of the rest of the country and indeed the rest of the world.
I love the way that you refer to it as still, where it's been about 48 hours, hasn't it, for most people?
No, surely longer than that.
I know it feels like months, but no, I think it's, about 48 hours. It's only from the beginning of the week that we're officially supposed to be, remain in your houses and...
Well, yes, but given that most of the country has been working from home for the past... what feels like 3 months, but in actuality is probably only about a week and a half. It does feel like we've been locked down for years, eons.
I'm very much actually locked down here because we've had a visit from the COVID fairy to my house. So
oh, really?
It feels, yes, my husband. But so we're locked down until not this Sunday coming, but the one after. And so obviously it's been 4 days, and we're about to lose our minds already.
Oh God!
And we have access to outdoor areas and stuff. I do feel for anybody in a flat who is in a 14-day lockdown.
Well, yeah. So best wishes to your lovely husband.
Thank you.
I'm sure he'll be fine in a week or so.
Oh, he's mild dose, a very mild dose, which is fortunate for us.
So, unsurprisingly, coronavirus has been virtually all anyone can talk about this week, us included, and the ripples of its impact continue to be felt throughout the tech world. For example, both Microsoft and Google have this week put the brakes on updating some of their major products.
Yes, so for Microsoft, this is Windows 10 and its built-in browser Edge. So it's not a full stop to anything. It is, feature releases, basically. Oh, also Windows Server. So, it's feature releases that aren't happening. So, essential security updates, they will still come out, but everything else is on hold, understandably, really. Yeah.
And in fact, the idea is to focus exclusively on security updates due to the fact that Microsoft, like most companies, is anticipating that its capacity and its workforce will be diminished in the coming weeks and months as coronavirus continues to have an impact. So, if you're going to focus on anything, then you might as well focus on the kind of critical security updates that your customers need. And in fact, that's probably a good thing because hackers have, in fact, also this week been observed exploiting an unpatched remote code execution vulnerability in Windows 10 in the wild.
Yes, I will spare everybody my usual house analogy. Google...
God. Finally, some good news in these bleak times.
Google is also, as you say, deciding to put the brakes on some of its releases. Chrome 82 will not happen. We're going to skip straight from Chrome 81 to 83 for very much the same reasons, foreseeing that there will be a lower number of people who can actually work on their products, presumably, and deciding that it's more important to just kind of roll with that particular punch and acknowledge that it's going to have to be straight to 83.
And indeed, focusing on security is probably a wise move, as it turns out, because healthcare organisations in particular have increasingly been coming under attack this week.
Yes, so this all started off with the World Health Organization being hit by a number of attempted hacks, and it spilled over into hospital systems in Spain and the Czech Republic being targeted by hackers who are... The attempts have been to lure people in with a phishing email, allegedly, or rather claiming to be about something to do with COVID, and actually it contains a piece of ransomware that will lock down all the computers. So very, very nefarious, actually. It's not just kind of incidental, and Spain is one of the countries that's been worst hit by the corona outbreak.
And the institution in the Czech Republic that was hit was also one of the country's top biomed labs, which has been doing a large amount of research into the COVID-19 virus and potential treatments and vaccines and the like. The healthcare organisations are pretty much always a lucrative target for cybercriminals, partly due to the fact that the level of cybersecurity within the healthcare sector is overall pretty low compared to a lot of other industries, but also because there is a treasure trove of personal information that's contained within it. Interestingly, many criminal groups have come out and claimed, at least, that they will be avoiding attacking healthcare institutions during this crisis, which is an oddly altruistic move on the part of cybercriminals.
It's not unheard of, actually. So back in the mists of time, you may remember a hacktivist, not really hacktivist, kind of hacking organisation called LulzSec.
Oh, yes.
They found a gaping hole in the NHS's systems, but didn't do anything with it apart from alerting the NHS that it existed. So, this kind of thing it's not unheard of, but obviously, other people are targeting it. And if you target a healthcare organisation in any situation, but especially something like this, then they're in a real bind, because if their systems are encrypted and the fastest way to get that data back in a crisis is to pay, then, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult situation, because while they will have backups, this is so fast moving and so urgent that it's trying to find a polite way of putting this. It's a real horrible person move. Yes, and speaking also briefly of the NHS, while there's been no indication that the NHS has been targeted at all yet, or nothing has been publicly acknowledged, NHSX, which deals with the digital side of the health service, has been warned to prioritise data protection while they are developing a COVID app. So in terms of data protection, while obviously it is important to protect people from hacking, it's also an ethical question. You're asking people to submit very sensitive information, because the entire point of the app is to trace contact between people. And there is very much a risk of sort of exposing people who have had the virus. Now, kind of maybe not right now, but going forward, we're all going to have had it, or a large proportion of people will have it if it's becoming endemic. But for the time being, you don't want to make people pariahs if this information leaks out.
And the NHS, it should be remembered, doesn't always have the most spotless record when it comes to data protection. Of course, it's been hit, as has, any organisation of that size, been hit by a number of data leaks and data breaches over the years. So this is definitely something that the NHSX team should be, giving a lot of consideration to. And speaking of apps and coronavirus, King's College London and NIHR Guy's and St Thomas's Biomedical Research Centre have also today released the first app to monitor the symptoms of the coronavirus and track its spread across the UK. In fact, beating the NHSX team to the punch. So that app is available now. It's currently shooting up the iOS charts, unsurprisingly. So check it out if it applies to you.
Healthcare systems aren't the only ones in trouble either. Networks around the world are starting to feel the strain, as one Australian minister found out.
Yes, this is a more entertaining spark of brightness in the COVID story. Australian Services Minister Stuart Roberts blamed an outage of one of Australia's online government benefits portals on a DDoS attack. He claimed foul play after the service went down. But in actuality, the service went down due to 95,000 users simultaneously logging on to find out more about the government's response to the coronavirus outbreak in terms of welfare following a government announcement.
Yes, perhaps a little bit of schadenfreude in our sniggers when it comes to being quite so fast out of the gate to be like, attackers. But, it's a problem that a lot of services are facing. From what I've seen, our government's websites seem to be standing up quite well when there is an influx of traffic. Although I admittedly have not visited every single website immediately after the nightly government broadcast. But other organisations such as Asthma UK have suffered from a sudden influx of traffic. This was because people were trying to determine whether or not they were part of the group that needs to self-isolate for 12 weeks because if they contract COVID, they could be very badly affected. And the organisation ended up just posting the information on Twitter in the end while they waited for all the traffic to calm down and people stopped getting a network timeout. Presumably they also expanded their capacity, although that is an assumption on my part.
In fact, many online cloud-based services have been experiencing various wobbles as demand spikes. We covered in last week's pod, Microsoft Teams had a slightly patchy start to the week with kind of several widespread outages as the service tried to cope with huge numbers of people suddenly working from home all at once. And other services around the world have been having similar problems. Now, in order to compensate for the slightly shaky network performance over the last couple of weeks, Microsoft has been prioritizing customers within the emergency services and kind of critical national infrastructure sectors in terms of giving them additional Azure capacity and kind of ring-fencing certain allocations of bandwidth to ensure that they have the service levels that they need to respond to the crisis.
Yes, and speaking of critical infrastructure and critical services, for those of us trapped at home, YouTube and Netflix, in an attempt to keep themselves upright, are clamping down on streaming quality to improve network load because, if you're not on your once-a-day exercise outside, then you're going to be stuck inside and, everybody is turning to the television and, there's quite a lot of binging going on. I must say it's kind of interesting. We're seeing problems with various supply chains, especially the disruption in the food supply chain in the UK. And it's almost like that's kind of reflected in a digital 21st century manner with this network wobbling that is happening.
If you're interested in tracking exactly which bits of what networks are wobbling at any given moment in time, network intelligence company Thousand Eyes has actually created a live map of network outages and service outages across the world, which you can check up on to see if your given video conferencing service or collaboration platform or streaming service of choice is currently having a bit of a moment.
Yes, and we will of course leave a link to that in our show notes.
Along with everything else we've talked about this week. Now that we've got all of those fun coronavirus updates out the way, we'll be taking a short break. But when we come back, we'll be joined by ITPro's US editor, Justin Cupler, to discuss a much cheerier subject, the US presidential election.
See you after the break. Welcome back. Now, along with trying to manage its response to one of the most serious pandemics in living memory, the US is also gearing up for 2020's presidential election, when incumbent Donald Trump will be defending his title against the Democratic challenger. The last 4 years of Trump's presidency have had a mixed impact on the tech sector, but would a Democratic win be better for tech? Here to fill us in on what's going on is ITPro US editor Justin Cupler. Justin, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
So, the US presidential election was said to be the biggest event of this year. It's now been somewhat overshadowed, but is rolling along regardless. Who's still in the running for the Democratic nomination?
Yeah, well, it started off with 29 candidates, which was absolutely insane.
God, really?
Yeah, it's usually between 6 and 10. This time 29, so it was a wild primary. But it's now been whittled down to 2 people. The front runner right now is Joe Biden, and then there's Bernie Sanders hot on his heels.
So how is Bernie looking? Because he previously came out quite strong, but I understand he's faltered a little bit since then.
Yeah, Bernie came out of the gate with a 35 delegate lead. So everyone was saying at that point that's insurmountable. He's going to win. And then Biden came off with a huge streak. I think it was following the Nevada primary, if I'm not mistaken. He's now up 1,215 delegates to 910 for Bernie Sanders. And now everyone has flipped and said now that lead is insurmountable. Given what they said about Sanders' lead in the past, I'm iffy whether or not it actually is insurmountable. There's still plenty of delegates out there, but the way the states lean, it looks like it's going to be probably Biden at this point.
Okay.
When do we get to find out for certain? Because the Labour leadership challenge over here feels like it's been going on for approximately forever.
At this point, with COVID going on, it's really hard to say. They keep pushing back the primaries in different states. Some of them have pushed them all the way back to, I think it's June at this point.
Wow.
So we could still be a few more months away from seeing it. We're at least going to be, I'd say, a couple of months before November, hopefully, by the time we get everything figured out.
Yeah, hopefully this is all started to abate a little bit by November. So Biden and Sanders, do either of them have any particular headline policies on technology?
Yeah, they both do. And some of them overlap, some of them are completely different. Sanders has pretty much 3 headline policies on his end. The first one, of course, is being he's a socialist-leaning Democrat. He's hard on big business, and he really wants to break up big tech. He's looking to break up places like Google, Facebook, Amazon, looking to break up their different sectors and their own individual companies and let them run themselves. He's also a strong supporter of net neutrality, which we all knew Donald Trump took away back in, I think it was 2018. He's a strong supporter of that coming back, and he's also opposing the backdoor access through encryption. So if someone has an iPhone and they have encrypted data on there, he doesn't want the federal government being able to go in. If maybe this person committed a crime, they don't want the federal government being able to go into the phone and find the sensitive data that might incriminate that person. But on the flip side, he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth by saying he also doesn't want tech being able to hide these criminals. So it's kind of going back and forth on that, but it looks like he was really against that backdoor access through the encryption. As for Biden, again, his are similar, but he is bigger on some different issues. His biggest thing is opposing Section 230. Now, what Section 230 is basically these big publishers, Facebook and so forth, saying that, hey, we're not responsible for the content users put on our website. So if you were to put something slanderous on there, Facebook couldn't be sued for it, but the user could. He is very much opposed to that. He actually called the big tech giants little creeps over their ability to just look the other way about this. And he actually called out Mark Zuckerberg by name about this. So he's pretty strong on that. That's his number one policy that I think if he gets in there, that's going to be the biggest shift we're going to see. But also he's big on a 15% minimum tax on tech. As we know, Amazon is famous for having paid quote-unquote 0% income tax over the years. Now they had credits that they've been using, but they actually did pay 0. And he's also, he also has privacy control similar to GDPR like you guys are used to. He wants to give users more control and more visibility as to what these companies are doing with your sensitive data. So you enter your email address and so forth. He wants the user to know and have control over what that company is going to, who it's going to sell it to, and what it's going to do with that data.
So with Biden being the front runner then, would you say that, I guess, the main impact of his presidency would be greater privacy protections for users and slightly more hardline on extracting money for the good of the people from a sector which is absolutely booming, but it has been lagging when it comes to actually paying its tax bills a bit?
Yeah, I think the tax is going to be the one he's going to have the least amount of resistance getting passed, because it's also going to depend on who is in the Senate, who's in the House of Representatives at that time. But that's going to be the one he's going to have the least amount of resistance, is that 15% tax, because Republicans and Democrats both don't want to see these big companies paying 0% tax. So that's going to be the one he's going to have the easiest time getting pushed through. So the one he's going to probably have the hardest time on is going to be that Section 230, because if he gets some left-leaning Democrats in there, they're not going to want these companies being held responsible for what other people say. They're big on First Amendment rights, they're big on freedom of speech, and they want these users to be able to have their freedom of speech without the large companies being held liable for what these people are saying. So that's probably the one that's going to have the hardest time within his own party getting passed if the trend continues and Democrats take over the entire Congress.
Yeah, I did some research on Section 230 a while ago. I found it really interesting because when it comes to the internet, as far as I can tell, it's sort of the kind of protections for hosts, effectively, that you wouldn't over here, for example, go after GoDaddy for hosting, something potentially slanderous or libelous or whatever. It's the problem of the website owner. And Facebook and so on are arguing that they are holding the same role as these hosting providers, rather than actually being a publishing platform themselves. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a good analysis of it, and it's a mixed bag between the Democrats and Republicans as to who's to be held liable for this stuff, because we do have our freedom of speech over here, and they want people to be able to do this stuff, but they also don't want the companies just having freedom to put whatever they want. I mean, the company could make Facebook or Twitter could make a dummy account and start thrashing a presidential candidate and sway the election. So then where's that border? Is that actually a user? Is that Twitter doing this? Where do we make that line, or just get rid of that line altogether and say you are responsible, so you need to take control over what's getting posted on your boards?
So in terms of that kind of moderation piece and the social media stuff, coming up to the election, it looks like it's going to be more and more of a hot button issue. Of course, Russian interference in the previous election was something that was a hot button issue with various investigations, including Robert Mueller's investigation into potential Russian interference, which is, of course, different from the investigation into potential collusion within the campaigns. But that investigation, along with some other ones, pointed very strongly to Russian military intelligence undertaking significant cyber actions to influence the election, including the hacking of the DNC and the release of John Podesta's emails and activities like that. Will we see an increase in this kind of activity being used as a key talking point as we get closer to the election itself and to November?
I would suspect at the very least it's going to be a number 2 or 3 thing. It's not going to be the number 1 thing we're going to hear the entire time leading up to the election, but it's going to be a very close number 2 or 3, and it's going to come from both sides. Joe Biden, of course, is going to talk about how the last election was skewed towards Trump because of the Russian interference and how it helped him and harmed Hillary Clinton. But then on Trump's side of it, he's going to try to talk about how it wasn't all the Russians. It was also Facebook was against me. Twitter was against me. Twitter was censoring, quote unquote, censoring conservative posters and things like that. Trying to get both sides of this equation when it comes to things being posted on social media and the interference. It's going to be a mixed bag when that comes around. It's not going to be the number 1 issue, like I said, but it will be a very close 2 or 3, I think.
So it's looking quite strongly like Biden is going to be the eventual nominee. But does the evidence, policy-wise, indicate that Biden is going to be better for the tech industry in the US than Trump is?
That is a very difficult one to answer, only because Trump's record with tech in general. He has done a few things, of course. He has had, he rolled back net neutrality, which was not necessarily a great thing. He did push AI, which was a good thing. But then he also is very adamant on the big tech with the, like I said before, about quieting conservative posters, posting things against him, which of course have pretty much gone unfounded, but he still harps on about that, about, hey, big tech is against me, they're against me, they're against me. But he hasn't really said, here's what I'm going to do about this. I'm going to censor these people. I'm going to make this law. He hasn't really pushed anything like that. So it's hard to say if he's going to just continue on in the next 4 years and let it keep riding, or if he's going to actually start enacting some policy that might affect these things. And things like Section 230 and the privacy, that may be things that tie into all of this. As for Biden is a lot more active, of course. The big thing we're going to run into with him, of course, is the privacy side, and then the Section 230. I think the big impact he's going to have is that Section 230, though, and I think that could actually have somewhat of a detrimental effect on tech in general. We're talking Facebook, Twitter, and things like that, because if he does get that passed, if he gets enough Democratic support and enough Republican support to get that type of law passed, that would suddenly make these large tech companies like Twitter and Facebook back off and say, hang on a second, we have to reevaluate our entire system. How can we avoid this? And that could cause these companies to drop financially. That could cause them to start cutting users. That could cause a bunch of different domino effects that could damage the entire tech industry, especially when you're dealing with those big monsters like that.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you once again, Justin, for joining us. You can find links to all of the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes, and even more on our website, www.itpro.co.uk.
You can follow ITPro on Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn, and sign up to the ITPro newsletter for a daily dose of IT news inside your inbox.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode.
If you want to get in contact with the show, you can email podcast@itpro.co.uk. We'll be back next week with more news and analysis from the world of IT.
Until then, goodbye.
Bye. The ITPro podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.